Okay, so in our last video we did some preliminary setup and we talked a little bit about some high-level concepts in Sonar. We set up some subnets and pools, we created some address lists and radius groups. So now let's move on actually assigning some IPs to customers. So if I go to my Network tab and I'm on my IP Assignments tab, I can click Assign here to put some IPs on the account. So by putting IPs on the account directly, I'm statically assigning either a single IP from a pool or a group of IPs in a subnet to this customer directly. So let's take a look at that. If I click Assign, see here I have four options. I can assign IPs onto the account directly, onto a radius account, onto an inventory item, or onto a non-inventoried MAC address. Now, however I assign these IPs, there's certain things that always happen. So whenever I put IPs on an account, those IPs will always be added to any appropriate address lists. So if you think back to our last video, we made an address list for all active customers. If I look at this account, it is active. So any IPs I add here are going to go into that active list that we created. So the differences with the assignees here is if I put it on the account, nothing else happens. All that happens is it goes into the address list. So if the only thing I'm really using for provisioning in Sonar is address lists, I could just put all my IPs on an account. Another example of why you might just put IPs on an account is maybe you're giving a customer a block of IPs, maybe you're giving them a subnet, and you're not going to give them out by DHCP, or you're not going to give them out by radius. They're going to be statically routed to that customer, for example. All we need to do is put them in the address list so that we can rate limit them or prioritize them or whatever we need to do. If I associate them with a radius account, the difference here is that we'll write the IPs as a radius attribute. So if you're using radius for something like PPPoE, when you want to give out IPs by radius, you would set a framed IP address or a framed route. That'll get created if I assign it with a radius account. I don't have any inventory items on my account, which is why this is grayed out, but the difference here is if I put it on an inventory item, I'll get to pick one of the MAC addresses on that item, and if I'm using DHCP, I'll write a DHCP reservation for the combination of that MAC address and that IP. And the same thing happens with a non-inventoried MAC address. The difference here is I'm not picking a MAC from an inventory item, I'm typing in a MAC address directly. And we'll do some of this in a little more detail when we get into setting up DHCP in a later video. But let's just start with the account here. So I can type in a description for the subnet or this IP if I want to give some detail as to why this is being assigned, or I can leave this blank. And then I have an option of doing this automatically or manually. If I do this manually, I can type in a specific IP or subnet I want to give this customer. If I do it automatically, I would just pick the subnet or pool I want to put this into, and it'll find the next available IP or subnet. So let's say this is a business customer, and they call me up and they say, I need 5 IPs because I have a web server and I have my PBX and other things I need to assign IPs to, and I say, okay, I'll give you a /29. That's going to give you the number of IPs you need. So I'd pick one of these subnets. I want to give this out from my first subnet. I'm going to pick my prefix 29. I want to give them a /29. I'm going to submit. We don't have anything available in there. If you think back to our last video, we filled up that whole subnet with a pool. So we don't have that size subnet available anymore. Okay, let's try my second subnet. I want to make it 29. Okay, we have space available there. So you can see now the subnet's been assigned, which subnet it's out of, what entity it's on my account, label of test account, and this shows if it's soft assigned. And this says no. So what soft assigned means is, has Sonar learned about this IP assignment through some kind of dynamic mechanism, or has this IP been statically assigned to this customer? Well, I statically added this. I just added this by using the assign function. So a soft assigned is no. So a time soft assigned might say yes is if I was giving this IP to this customer by DHCP and it was dynamically given out. The DHCP server can deliver to Sonar that reservation, and Sonar will store it and say it's been soft assigned. Or if we're doing PPPoE and you're giving IPs out of a pool, Sonar is going to go look at the radius server and see what IPs are being given out in real time and store them, and that would be soft assigned yes as well. But we'll get into that a little more later. So you can see down here in my assignment history now, I show the subnet that was assigned, when it was given out, and when it was taken away. So right now this says up until present, because they still have this IP on their account. So let's do one more. Let's say I was going to do a non-inventoried MAC. I'm going to put in a fake MAC address here. And when we're doing it by MAC, I can only pick from pools because the only reason to associate it with a MAC is to do DHCP. And the only way we can do DHCP is out of a pool. So I only have pools available. So let's pick a pool. And now you can see, here's the IP that's given. Here's the MAC address it's associated with. Is it soft assigned? No. And the IP is shown down here. So if we had a working DHCP service set up, what would have happened just now is I would have gone and written a DHCP reservation for the combination of this MAC and this IP to my DHCP server. Let's do one final one. I'm going to associate an IP with my Radius account. Pick my Radius account here. I have one called Sonar 1. I'll show you that in here in a second. And again, I can pick automatic or manual. So when we associate with a Radius account, I can pick a subnet or a pool. If I pick from a pool, it'll get written as a framed IP address, which is a standard Radius attribute. If I add it as a subnet, it'll get written as a framed route, which is again a standard Radius attribute. I'm going to pick a subnet here. So let's pick my second subnet. I'm going to give a /30, and I'm going to assign that. Okay, so we have 3 IP assignments on the account now. I have an IP out of a pool associated with a MAC, which would write a DHCP reservation if I have a DHCP server. I have a subnet associated with my account, which is just going to write an address list entry. And I have a subnet associated with my Radius account, which is going to create a framed route. So you can kind of see the difference here in doing these assignments, what happens. And all 3 of these subnets and IPs would be added to any matching address lists that I have configured. So hopefully that all makes sense. Okay, I'm going to delete one of these out of here now, and let's take a look at this. So I'm going to copy this IP, because we're going to use it again in a minute, and I'm going to delete it. So when I delete an IP address, we just go in reverse, right? I'm going to delete the framed route attribute from my Radius server when I do this. I'm going to remove this IP from any matching address lists. And you'll see that down at the bottom now, my assignment history, it shows I assigned this and then I removed it. So we can still see this customer used to have this IP, but they don't have it anymore. Okay, let's jump back into IPAM quickly, and I want to show you one small thing in here. We have this IP lookup tool, and I can come in here, and if I look up that IP I just removed, it tells me who currently has it, which is nobody, and who previously had it. So test account had it. It's part of this /30 in this range. One other thing to notice here, I can just search for an IP that's part of that subnet, and it's still going to bring this up. So this is useful if you get something like a DMCA request, or if you got a subpoena and you need to know who had an IP at a certain time, you can always come here and look that up. Final way we can assign IPs is to put them on network sites. This does not create address list entries. We don't create address lists for infrastructure IPs. But you can see when I'm on my network site here, I'm able to put IPs on here. So the reason to do this would be to remove these IPs from the list. You want to show they've been used. So let's just do one really quickly. If you remember the subnet we created, servers in rack 1, I have a subnet here. I'm going to assign a single IP, and this is going to be for my, let's say this is for my web server. And now I have an IP associated with this network site that I can go put on that server, and it's stored and shown as used in IPAM. So to finish up this video, let's jump back into IPAM quick, and we'll just do a quick review. If you remember, we have one IP assigned in this pool, and I could jump over to the account by clicking here. We just created a server, which is assigned to the network site. I can jump over and look at it here. And I can always use my IP lookup to look up an IP that I've assigned and know who currently has it and all the previous assignments. Okay, so that wraps up this video. Now we're going to jump into doing some real-world provisioning, showing how you can actually integrate some inline devices, some Radius servers, DHCP servers, and that kind of thing. So stay tuned.